The building breathed in silence. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights flickering above freshly waxed floors. It was 11:47 p.m., and the janitor's footsteps echoed like a slow metronome down the marble hallway. Deliberate, steady, alone. Mop in one hand, bucket trailing behind like a quiet companion. He moved through the lobby like he'd been born there, invisible but essential. His coveralls were worn, frayed at the sleeves, and one button hung by a single tired thread. His name tag, Eddie, was scratched halfway through. Outside, the city sparkled, windows glowing with late-night ambition. Inside, Eddie wiped away smudges that no one would notice had been there. He paused near the front desk and reached into his thermos. Stale coffee. Still warm enough. He took a sip and glanced toward the security monitor. No movement. No visitors. Just himself. And time. In the break room, a single folding chair waited beside a tiny metal locker. On top of the locker was a picture frame. A faded photo of a woman holding a little boy, maybe 5. Taped beneath it, written in neat block letters, "Don't forget who you're doing this for." Eddie sighed. His knees popped as he bent to clean under the vending machine. Candy wrappers, a dropped coin, a pen cap. He pulled the trash bag tight and tied it in a careful knot, setting it by the exit. Then he saw it. A yellow sticky note on the side of the bin, written in unfamiliar handwriting. "Today's my birthday." No name, no signature, just quiet paper in a building full of ghosts. Eddie looked around, suddenly unsure if he was still alone. The hallway was supposed to be empty, but Eddie stopped mid-step when he heard something. Not footsteps, breathing, labored, hushed. He turned the corner slowly, mop handle gripped like a bat. There, hunched near the fire exit, sat a man in a navy blue overcoat, his face buried in his hands, shoulders trembling. His shoes polished. His cufflinks glinted under the emergency exit light. Eddie froze. 1,000 silent nights, and now this. He cleared his throat gently. "Sir, you all right?" The man didn't look up first. Then, slowly, he turned, tired eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. His voice cracked like paper. "Didn't mean to scare you." "You didn't. Just ain't used to company at this hour." Eddie took a cautious step forward. "You lost or waiting for someone?" The man offered a broken smile. "Maybe I'm the one who's lost." "Anything I can help with?" Eddie asked. The man chuckled under his breath. "Not unless you've got a time machine." Eddie glanced around, unsure. Break room's got coffee, old but hot. The man didn't move. His gaze stayed distant. "I came to this building 40 years ago for my first job. Stood right here. Back then, the floors gleamed like gold. They still do. Somebody's been keeping them that way." The stranger looked up. Their eyes finally met. "Today's my birthday, and no one remembered. Not even my own son." Eddie said nothing, but something in his chest sank, heavy and slow, like an old chair creaking under weight that had been there too long. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence between them, steady, mechanical, almost nervous. Eddie pressed his hand against the glass, staring at the rows of snacks. Chips, candy bars, one stale honey bun spinning in the corner like it was clinging to its last chance. The stranger, still seated near the exit, rubbed his eyes. His suit looked expensive once, but the sleeves were frayed. He spoke without looking up. "You ever notice these machines always eat your money when you need them most?" Eddie smiled faintly. "Yeah, they got attitude, like people." He pulled a few coins from his pocket, quarters rubbed dull by years of work. He fed them into the slot, pressed B7, and watched as the honey bun dangled halfway before getting stuck. "Come on," he muttered, smacking the glass. "Don't embarrass me in front of company." The stranger let out a dry laugh, his first sound of life. "Looks like even machines don't listen." Eddie crouched, slipped his hand through the retrieval flap, and pushed until the snack dropped. He tore the wrapper open halfway and held it out. "Here. Ain't fresh, but it's sweet." The man hesitated, then took it, slowly, like it weighed more than it should. "You didn't have to." "I know. That's kind of the point." The stranger nodded, chewing quietly. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them, like tiny, tired stars. Eddie stood, brushing off his knees. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "I'll bring you cake." The man looked up startled. "Cake?" "Everyone deserves cake on their birthday," Eddie answered, before walking away down the shining hall. Behind him, the vending machine's light flickered once, then went out. Morning came slow, its light creeping through dusty blinds. Eddie sat on the edge of his mattress, a twin barely wide enough for his back. The alarm hadn't gone off. It didn't need to. Habit woke in before sunlight did. He reached for his wallet on the nightstand. $3, a grocery receipt, a worn photo of a boy with front teeth missing. He folded the bills carefully and slipped them into his pocket, then opened a drawer near the window. Inside, tucked beneath socks and bus tokens, sat a small black radio, chipped, heavy, dependable. He paused, ran his hand over its surface. It had belonged to his late wife. He exhaled slow and deliberate, then wrapped it in an old t-shirt and placed it gently in a bag. Downtown was already bustling. Eddie walked past corner vendors, hot dog carts, and coffee windows. He stopped at a pawn shop, cash for anything, blinking in neon red. The bell jingled. A gruff man behind the counter didn't look up. Eddie unwrapped the radio. "Still works. Strong signal." The man flipped it over, shrugged. $10. Eddie hesitated, then nodded. An hour later, he was back inside the bakery near 14th and King, the kind with hand-drawn chalk menus and soft music playing overhead. He pointed to a small chocolate cake in the display. "That one. And can you write on it?" The clerk smiled. "Sure thing. What should it say?" Eddie cleared his throat. "Happy birthday, Leo." He cradled the cake like it was glass. No candles. Just frosting and a name. Back at work, before the others arrived, he unlocked the janitor's closet, shifted aside the mop bucket, and placed the cake carefully on the top shelf. Out of sight, but waiting. The building was quieter than usual that night, the kind of quiet that made even fluorescent lights feel shy. Eddie moved slowly past the lobby, then down the east hallway, half expecting the man to be gone, a dream in slacks and cufflinks. But he was there again. Same spot. Sitting cross-legged this time, a newspaper folded neatly on his lap, though he never read it. Eddie walked over and leaned against the wall. "You didn't think you'd come back," the man said, without looking up. I shrugged. "Didn't think you would either." They sat in silence for a beat. "I brought you something," Eddie said, eyes forward. The man turned. "You're serious?" Eddie didn't answer, just motioned with his thumb. "It's in the closet. Top shelf. Might be a little smushed." There was a long pause, a flicker of something between disbelief and gratitude in the man's face. "What's your name?" the man asked, voice softer now. "Eddie," Eddie said. "You?" The man hesitated. "Leo." Eddie raised an eyebrow. "Like the lion?" Leo smirked faintly. "More like the ghost." They both chuckled. "I used to walk these halls every morning. Had a key to every room, back when there were typewriters and landlines and real coffee in the break room." Eddie studied him closer now, really looked. You work here? The man nodded, fingers tracing invisible patterns on the tile. He turned to Eddie fully now, voice lower. But now, I'm just a shadow in it. Eddie's smile faded. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, not of names or faces, but of weight, of carrying something too long alone. The janitor's closet smelled like bleach and pine soap, a humble cathedral of quiet labor. Eddie stood inside, box in his arms, watching as Leo stepped through the threshold like it was sacred ground. He looked up at the shelf. "You really did it?" he asked, almost smiling. Eddie nodded, then opened the box. The cake was a little lopsided. The frosting tilted like it had sighed on the walk-in, but the words held. Eddie wandered deeper into the west wing, a corridor long unused, lined with dark wooden doors covered in dust. The brass placards on them were faded, the letters barely legible. Room 406, room 408. He paused at room 410. The door had no plaque, just faint glue residue where something once clung. Eddie pulled out his master key ring, rusty from years of use, and tried each one. The sixth clicked. The door creaked open like a breath being drawn after years underwater. Dust danced in the golden light filtering through cracked blinds. The air was thick with stillness. A heavy desk sat under a sheet. File cabinets stood like forgotten soldiers. He peeled back the sheet. A nameplate. L.R. Whitmore, Managing Director. His throat tightened. On the wall behind the desk hung a framed certificate, water-stained but still legible. A photo of a younger man in front of the building's ribbon cutting. Leo, 20 years ago, smiling, confident, alive. A stack of papers lay untouched on the desk, memos dated 2003. One read, "Effective immediately. Mr. Whitmore has been relieved of all managerial duties." Eddie stepped back. That birthday cake, that hallway seat, that sorrow. Leo hadn't just worked here. Leo was this place. Eddie's breath caught. This wasn't just a lonely old man seeking warmth. This was someone fading and trying to be remembered before he disappeared completely. The control room was tucked behind the main lobby, past a keypad Eddie never used. But tonight, he felt pulled toward it, as if Leo's shadow had left a trail only he could follow. He tapped on the door. Security had already signed out. Their clipboards sat untouched. Eddie turned on the monitors, which blinked to life in grayscale. He reached for the playback button. "Tuesday night, 11:50 p.m., he muttered. The footage played, the hallway outside the break room, the lobby, the loading dock, and the fire exit corridor, where Leo always sat. He squinted. He watched himself turn the corner, pause, speak to what looked like empty air. He leaned closer, heart thudding. There was no one beside him, no second figure, no Leo. Just Eddie talking to the wall, to the floor, to the silence. He fast-forwarded. The break room, empty. The janitor's closet, empty. The footage showed him placing the cake on the top shelf, alone. He ran it again, slower. Still no one. His hand trembled over the pause button. The room was too still, the air too loud. He leaned back in the chair, eyes scanning the monitor, hoping for something he missed. A shadow, a flicker, a hint of someone standing just outside the frame. Nothing, just one man, and a kindness no one witnessed. He stood slowly, gripping the desk for balance. His reflection in the dark monitor stared back at him, tired, confused, unsure. He whispered to the empty room, "Then who did I buy that cake for?" The only answer was the soft, mechanical whirl of the footage restarting, again and again. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Eddie returned to the break room. The cake box still sat in the corner, on a metal shelf, untouched, the candle long cooled, a quiet monument to something he couldn't explain. He reached out, hand hovering above the box. "I saw you, Leo," he muttered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. "You were right here." Behind him, a chair creaked. Eddie froze. He turned. Leo was seated at the fold-out table, hands folded neatly, face calm, as if nothing had changed. "You shouldn't watch those tapes," Leo said softly. "I didn't see you on any of them, not once." Leo smiled, eyes gentle. "Sometimes being seen isn't the same as being remembered." Eddie's breath hitched. "What are you?" Leo stood. His footsteps made no sound on the linoleum. He looked around the room like it was a childhood home left behind. "I just wanted one more birthday where someone remembered I mattered," Leo said low, warm, and full of old grief. I do." Leo nodded. "That's why you saw me." Eddie blinked. "This isn't real." Leo tilted his head. "Real enough to make you care." The room swam. Eddie gripped the table for balance. His knees buckled. "Leo," he gasped, clutching his chest. But Leo was gone. The chair empty. The box of cakes still closed. A sharp ringing filled the air. Then the blur of red lights. Someone yelling, "Sir, can you hear me? Stay with us." EMTs gathered around his collapsed frame. His eyes fluttered, and the last thing he saw was the flickering light above the cake box. Still waiting. The beeping of machines replaced the hum of the janitor's cart. White walls, softer lighting, everything too sterile, too still. Eddie blinked against the fluorescent haze above him, vision swimming in and out. The sheets felt stiff, the gown itchy. A plastic cuff pinched his wrist. "Dad?" A voice, familiar, but sharper now, older. He turned his head. There she was, Lily, in scrubs, a hospital badge clipped to her collar, and a worry line between her brows that hadn't been there before. "You gave everyone a scare," she said, forcing a smile as she adjusted his IV. "Collapsed near the break room. Dehydration, stress, probably haven't eaten a proper meal in a week." Eddie tried to speak, but his throat cracked. She handed him water. He took a slow sip. "I saw someone," he whispered. "You're not supposed to be seeing anything except your own heartbeat right now," she replied gently. "You scared me." He pushed the words out. "His name's Leo. I brought him a cake. He wasn't on the tape." Lily stilled. "Tape?" He said the cameras, eyes glazing. "He wasn't there, but I saw him, talked to him, sang to him." She brushed his hand with hers. "Dad, I think maybe you're tired, or grieving, or both." "I'm not crazy," he muttered. "I didn't say you were. But you're exhausted, working too hard, alone too long." Her eyes softened. "Maybe it's time to come home, or at least leave that building behind." Eddie closed his eyes. All he could see was Leo blowing out the candle. All he could hear was that quiet birthday song. Lily leaned in, her voice breaking gently. "Dad, you need rest, not haunted buildings." Eddie returned to the building 2 nights later, against his daughter's advice, against logic, but not against instinct. He walked slower now, hand on the wall as he passed room 410 again, Leo's old office. The air felt heavier here, like dust carried memory. The office door creaked open. This time, Eddie wandered deeper. Behind the bookcase was a small panel in the wall, painted over. He ran his fingers along the edge and felt it give. Inside was a vent.
Taped to the inner panel, tucked like a secret someone hoped would one day be found, was a faded brown leather notebook. The elastic band barely held it shut. He pulled it out, heart suddenly louder than his footsteps. The pages smelled like thyme and mildew. Ink bled from years of humidity, but the words were still there. Day 2 without speaking to my son. He called me a relic. Said I didn't know how to adapt. He's right. Flip. They removed my name from the door today, said they needed new energy. I gave them my life. Flip. Tear stains on a page dated 10 years ago. No one celebrates my birthday anymore. Not since Maria passed. Sometimes I think if I disappeared, the building wouldn't notice. Eddie swallowed the lump in his throat. The final page held just one sentence. If someone finds this, don't let them forget who I was. Eddie closed the notebook slowly and held it to his chest. He didn't know if Leo was alive, a ghost, or something in between. But he knew now. Someone was begging not to be erased. Eddie sat in the old leather chair behind Leo's desk. The journal rested open on his lap, its pages worn like the palms of working men. He turned back a few entries and began reading aloud softly, as if Leo's voice could fill the room again. My son, Michael, hasn't spoken to me in 7 years. The pen strokes grew shakier the deeper he read. He hated how I ran things, said I treated people like numbers. He was right. I was trying to teach him order, but he needed understanding.
Please be advised, uniforms and storage assignments will be reissued under the new leadership. Submit locker numbers for inspection. Eddie clenched his jaw. His locker held more than tools. It held pieces of a man no one remembered, including him. He walked to the break room, found his supervisor, a stocky man named Bill, chewing a sandwich at 9:30 a.m. Bill, who's taking over? Eddie asked. Bill shrugged. Some firm out of New York. Young guy, big money. They'll probably gut half the team, bring in their own crew. When? Monday. Be ready to smile and scrub. Eddie nodded slowly. The building he spent decades maintaining, scrubbing, fixing, caring for like a second skin was about to become a stranger's investment. And him? Just another line on a staffing report. Bill slapped the last bit of mayo off his hands and muttered, New owner arrives Monday. Staff reviews begin. The janitor's closet was never meant to hold memories. But it did. Eddie sat on a paint bucket with the door half shut and surrounded by bottles of glass cleaner, a squeaky fan, and silence. The cake box still sat on the top shelf, its corners sunken in just slightly. He hadn't touched it in days. He pulled open his old lunchbox. Buried beneath napkins and aspirin was a folded photo. A boy, maybe 15, holding a basketball under one arm and smirking at the camera. His son. Eddie brushed his thumb across the image. The face he hadn't seen in years stared back like it had never aged. He exhaled through his nose, leaned back, and started speaking. Not to anyone present, but to the mop heads and metal shelves, as if they could answer. I used to yell at him for sleeping through alarms. Said if you show up late in this world, people don't wait for you. Told him kindness wasn't enough. You needed grit. Didn't realize I was teaching him how to leave. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a receipt, flipped it over, and began writing with a dull pencil. Hey kid, I know I wasn't easy to live with. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was protecting myself from being seen too close. He paused, stared at the words, then folded the receipt in half, slid it into the inside cover of Leo's journal. No envelope, no address. Just a quiet confession filed among someone else's pain. Because sometimes telling the truth is easier when you know it won't be heard. Eddie rarely used the main elevator. It wasn't built for people like him, just marble and mirrors and soft jazz meant for suits. But today the freight lift was jammed and the cleaning carts had already gone up. So he stepped in, mop bucket in hand. He pressed floor 9. The doors began to close, then stopped. A sleek black shoe slipped in, followed by a man in a tailored charcoal gray suit, mid-30s, sharp jawline, the kind of presence that made spaces straighten their posture. Eddie stepped aside politely. The man nodded, tapped floor 11, then checked his phone. His watch glinted, silver and thin. Silence stretched like static. The elevator hummed upward, floor by floor. At floor 7, it jolted, then stopped. The lights flickered once, then steadied. They were stuck. The man sighed, visibly annoyed. Eddie pressed the intercom button. No response. Figures, Eddie muttered. The man chuckled dryly. New building, same old problems. Eddie glanced at him sideways. This ain't new, just covered in new paint. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by reflections of themselves in gold-tinted mirrors. You work here long? The man asked. Eddie nodded. Long enough to know which ceiling tiles leak and which locks pretend to work. The man smiled, folding his arms. I'm Leo's son. Eddie froze. Sorry? But the man didn't clarify. Instead, he added softly, he used to tell me stories about this place. Said it had a soul if you knew where to look. Eddie stared at him. Something in his cheekbones. His voice. Familiar. Too familiar. Like a younger echo of someone who'd already said goodbye. The man looked at him now. Really looked. Eddie's breath caught. The elevator wasn't the only thing that had stopped. The air in the elevator thickened, not with heat, but with something heavier. Recognition. Unspoken history. The younger man shifted, sliding his phone into his pocket. He used to sit in this hallway, right under that emergency light. Said the shadows were softer there. Eddie didn't reply. He didn't have to. He already knew who he was. Leo, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded. He was complicated, sharp one moment and silent the next, but he never forgot this place. Eddie glanced down at his work boots. The scuffs had stories. The polish hadn't reached them in years. I thought I was losing my mind, Eddie said slowly. I saw him, talked to him, bought him cake. The man looked up surprised. You did? Yeah, he told me it was his birthday. Sat down with me like we were just two guys waiting for time to pass. There was a pause, then softer. What kind of cake? Chocolate, small one, with his name. The man's face twitched, barely, but Eddie caught it. I didn't know who he was at first, just saw a man that looked tired of being forgotten. The elevator lights flickered again, but neither moved. He had regrets, the man said quietly. Don't we all? Eddie replied. The man's voice cracked, something caught between a son and a stranger. I didn't go to his last birthday, ignored the calls. By the time I changed my mind, the phone had already gone quiet. Eddie swallowed hard. His hand brushed the folded letter in his pocket. He didn't need apologies. He just needed someone to remember him. Silence. But it wasn't empty. It was full. The elevator jolted softly. Not enough to move, just enough to remind them where they were. Suspended. Between floors. Between past and present. Leo's son turned toward Eddie, his voice lower now, measured. You said you brought him a cake. Eddie nodded slowly. He cried when I sang. Not loud. Just the kind of tears men save for when they think no one's watching. The younger man looked away, jaw tightening. I didn't cry at the funeral. Didn't even speak. I just stood there. Cold. Angry. And afterwards, I told myself it didn't matter. Eddie didn't say anything. He always talked about this building like it was alive, like it needed him. I resented that. Thought it was just nostalgia. He paused. I didn't know someone still saw him. Still heard him. Eddie's throat tightened. I thought he was a ghost. Maybe he still is. But if he came back, it's because he needed one last thing. The man nodded slowly. To be remembered. A silence settled between them. Not awkward, not strained, just grief. finally standing still long enough to be seen. The elevator dinged unexpectedly. The light steadied. Movement. As the doors creaked open, Leo's son stepped forward, but before exiting, he turned. His eyes shimmered, not just with sadness, but with something else. Something like humility. "You honored my father more than I ever did." Eddie blinked, stunned. The man offered a slight, almost trembling smile. "Thank you," he said, then disappeared into the hallway, leaving Eddie alone in the silence once more. But this silence felt different. Not empty. Holy. Eddie stood in the hallway again the next day, waiting. He didn't know what for exactly. Maybe another strange conversation. Maybe proof that Leo hadn't just vanished into memory. But instead, Leo's son appeared, dressed sharply, composed, but different now, softer in the eyes. "I've been looking for you," he said. Eddie blinked. "You found another elevator to get stuck in?" The man smiled faintly, then reached into his coat and pulled out a legal-size envelope, cream-colored, sealed with a wax stamp. "I didn't know this existed until last night. My father left this with his lawyer, just in case someone remembered him." Eddie hesitated. "Why me?" His voice cracked slightly. "Because no one else did." Eddie opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside, a notarized letter, typed, signed, "To be enacted only in the event that someone outside my family acknowledges my existence on my birthday." Eddie's eyes scanned faster. "The building, my share of it, will transfer to that person in full. Not out of sentiment, but because anyone who still remembers a forgotten man deserves to own more than a mop." Eddie looked up. This is a joke, right?" The man shook his head. "It's real." Eddie staggered back a step. "I'm a janitor." "No," Leo's son said, voice steady. "You're the only one who saw the man my father used to be." Eddie clutched the paper like it might vanish, like it was too much. Because it was. He stared at the floor, barely whispering. "He really left me the building?" Leo's son nodded. This was his will. He left it to whoever remembered him last. The janitor's closet hadn't changed. Same rust on the bucket, same click in the door hinge. But Eddie stood inside like a stranger now. Letter still in his hand, heart still refusing to believe it. The building creaked in the distance.
"I don't," he said. "Not really. I didn't do anything special. Just gave a man a cake." "Exactly," she said, "when no one else did." He looked away, voice low. "Maybe I'm not supposed to keep it. Maybe I'm just supposed to pass it on." "To who?" she asked. He stared at the mop in the corner, the closet, the building. "Someone else who's invisible." The apartment smelled like soup on the stove and something citrus in the cleaner Lily always used when she was nervous. Eddie sat at her small kitchen table while she paced in front of him. The envelope now open, documents spread like evidence in a courtroom neither of them asked to be in. "Dad, this isn't just a good deed getting you a thank you card," she said, hands in her hair. "It's property law, legal transfer, taxes, inspections, staff, insurance. This is serious." "I know it is," he said quietly. "Do you?" she snapped, turning to face him. "You still live off store-brand cereal and forget to pay the electric bill sometimes." "I paid it," he muttered. 4 days late. Eddie sighed. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't chase it. I just showed up, like always." She sat across from him, exhaling hard. "You don't owe the world this much." "I'm not trying to pay the world back," he said. "Just one man who sat in a hallway and asked to be remembered." Lily's eyes softened, but didn't let go. "And now you want to run a building?" "I don't want to run it. I want to keep it warm, human, the way Leo remembered it." She stared at him, not just at his face, but the wornness in his posture, the kindness in his exhaustion. I watched you struggle your whole life, and now this? He didn't reply. He just looked at her, like a man who had nothing left to lose, except the quiet dignity he'd finally been handed. The box wasn't large. It sat near the back of the office desk drawer Eddie had left untouched since reading Leo's journal. A velvet case, tucked under yellowed Post-it notes and old pens that no longer wrote. Something about it pulled him closer. He opened it slowly. Inside, cushioning fabric that had long since faded from blue to gray, was a watch. Silver band, minimalist face, small engraving on the back. Eddie turned it over. The words were small, almost invisible beneath scratches in time. To those who remember. No name, no date, just a whisper etched into metal. He lifted it, surprised by its weight. It wasn't expensive looking. It wasn't polished, but it was real. Eddie sat down at the desk where Leo had once signed papers that moved lives without touching them. He ran his fingers over the cold steel band, hesitated, then slid the watch onto his wrist. It clicked closed with a sound like final punctuation. He lifted his arm. It fit perfectly. Not tight, not loose, like it had been waiting. He stared at the ticking second hand, its rhythm steady, alive. The hum of the building seemed to fall into sync with it, as if Leo's presence had been layered into every ticking second. Eddie leaned back in the chair, closing his eyes briefly. Leo hadn't left behind gold, or applause, or even forgiveness. He left time. Time remembered. Time honored. Time passed from one invisible man to another. Eddie looked at the watch again, breathing deep. He didn't feel like the same man anymore, and the second hand kept moving. Eddie stood outside the glass doors for a moment too long. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with quiet voices and louder watches. Every suit looked pressed, every tie sharpened, every chair filled with someone who didn't know the scent of floor wax or the weight of a mop handle. He smoothed the front of his borrowed blazer. It hung loose on his shoulders, a Goodwill find, 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled back with shaky hands. He pushed the doors open. The room hushed. All eyes turned to him, a man with calloused hands, creased jeans beneath a half-fitted coat, and a folder tucked under his arm like it might save his life. "Can we help you?" asked a sharply dressed man near the head of the table. Eddie cleared his throat. "I'm Eddie. I maintain the night shift here." A smirk rippled through the room. "I believe this meeting is for executive leadership only," said another man, not even lifting his eyes from a tablet. Eddie stepped forward, slow and steady. He opened the folder, revealing a copy of the transfer papers. Leo's name at the top, Eddie's scribbled signature at the bottom. "The building's mine now. It was left to me." The men looked at each other. Confusion, disbelief, thinly veiled disgust. Eddie walked to the head of the table, placed the papers down. His voice didn't shake this time. "Gentlemen," he took his seat. "I'm the new owner. Let's get to work." The room didn't breathe, and for the first time, neither did Eddie, because he didn't need to prove he belonged. He already did. The next morning, Eddie unlocked the west hallway, the one most employees passed without looking. The walls there had always been blank, pale gray, lifeless, until now. He rolled out a cart carrying thumbtacks, markers, tape, and a stack of corkboards. He hung the first one near the elevator. A printed sign sat in the middle. "Tell us who built this place. Leave a name, a memory, a moment." At first, no one stopped. But by lunch, the board had 2 sticky notes. By evening, it had 10. Leo taught me how to run payroll without making people feel small. He shook my hand the day I cleaned my first bathroom solo. I spilled coffee on his tie in '04. He said it looked better that way. Eddie read each one by one, as if collecting puzzle pieces of a man who had once walked the same halls. By the end of the week, they had to add a second board, then a third. Photos were pinned up. Leo at the holiday party in 1998, smiling with paper reindeer ears on, a faded shot of him shaking hands with the old head of security, a handwritten note on a napkin, "Thanks for listening when no one else did." Janitors, receptionists, accountants, even the guy who delivered vending machine snacks. One by one, they came forward. Not to grieve, but to remember. Because for the first time in years, the building wasn't just tall and paid for. It was lived in. Eddie stepped back from the wall and looked down the hallway. It no longer echoed. Now, it breathed. It was late. The memory wall had gone quiet. Eddie sat behind the front desk flipping through Leo's journal again, not to read, but to feel the weight of it in his hands. A kind of grief you don't rush. The doors slid open with a hush of cold air. He looked up and froze. There, standing beneath the lobby lights, was his son. Older now, taller, same stubborn jawline, same quiet fury in the eyes, but different too, like time had sanded down some of the sharper edges. Neither of them spoke right away. Eddie stood slowly. How do you know I was here?" The young man reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded, creased piece of paper. Eddie's handwriting. The letter he'd scribbled on the back of a receipt, tucked into Leo's journal. Never sent. "I came by to visit Mom's grave, stopped by the building, thought I'd see if you were still pushing a mop." "I'm not," Eddie said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I read your letter." Eddie's throat tightened. "I didn't think anyone would. I almost walked out, but then I saw the wall. The one with Leo's name." Eddie looked down. His voice trembled. "I didn't know how to say any of it." His son nodded. "Neither did I." A pause, then, "I think we both have things to fix." Eddie blinked fast. The paper between them crinkled as his son extended it, not to return it, but to offer it again. A second chance. And Eddie took it. Eddie didn't expect anyone to remember his birthday. He hadn't mentioned it, hadn't circled it on a calendar. He treated it like every other day. Mop in hand, coffee in thermos, one foot in the past, the other still unsure of the future. So when he opened the break room door that evening and sought a cake, sitting nightly on the table, single candle standing tall, he stopped in his tracks. Chocolate frosting, no fancy design, just 5 words piped in shaky but heartfelt script. "Happy birthday, Eddie. Thank you." Footsteps echoed behind him. It was Leo's son, Michael, holding a lighter, expression softer than Eddie remembered from the elevator. "You remembered," Eddie said, stunned. Michael lit the candle. "You did it for him. I figured someone should do it for you." A smile crept across Eddie's face, slow and unsure, like his cheeks had forgotten how to shape joy. He stared at the flickering flame. The room felt warmer than usual, lighter. Michael pulled two.
"Doesn't matter," Reggie said. "You sit in meetings now, wear jackets. They treat you different." Eddie looked around at the shelves he once organized, the floor he once swept without complaint. "I didn't ask to be in that room." "But you didn't turn it down either," Reggie said, quieter now. Eddie paused, eyes falling on the old radio he once pawned. Someone had brought it back, duct-taped and buzzing faintly. He reached toward it, turned the dial. Static gave way to a soft, fading jazz tune. He let it play. No words, no defense. Because maybe Reggie was right. The line between us and them was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. "You're one of us," Reggie said, stepping closer. "But now you sit with them?" Eddie didn't answer. Not yet. The mirror in the executive restroom was too clean. Eddie stood in front of it, tugging at the sleeves of a stiff white shirt. The collar scratched. The buttons didn't sit right on his chest, too flat in some places, too tight in others. The department store clerk had called it a starter wardrobe. Starter for what? He looked at himself, not just his face, but the way the blazer clung to shoulders that had pushed brooms, not paperwork. His shoes, freshly shined, felt foreign, slippery. A tie hung loosely around his neck. He didn't bother tightening it. He remembered when his daughter had tried to teach him how to tie one for her graduation. He'd fumbled with it for 30 minutes before giving up and wearing a pullover sweater instead. Now here he was, dressed like a man who signed contracts. He walked down the hallway toward the boardroom. People nodded at him. They used to nod past him. Someone said, "Morning, Mr. Carter." He flinched. The title tasted strange. He reached the glass wall near the elevator, the one that reflects just enough to catch yourself at a glance. And there he was, polished, pressed, unfamiliar. He stepped closer, watched himself move like someone trying not to trip in borrowed shoes. He raised his hand and placed it gently on the glass. "I don't even recognize me," he whispered. The reflection didn't answer, just stared back, silent and suited. And somewhere behind his ribs, Eddie felt the ghost of a mop handle still pressing into his palm. The email hit his inbox at 8:02 a.m. Subject line: formal concern regarding Mr. Edward Carter. Eddie stared at the screen for a full minute before opening it. His office was still, blinds drawn, coffee cooling on the windowsill, Leo's watch ticking steadily on his wrist. The message was typed, impersonal. "While Mr. Carter's story may inspire human interest, I am formally submitting this concern due to his lack of experience in operations, financial oversight, and leadership. Personal sentiment is not a substitute for professional competence." No name, no signature, just anonymous board member. He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. This building had taken him in, let him scrub its floors, sweep its secrets into corners, and now that he was above the tiles, the knives had turned upward. A soft knock. It was Diane, one of the front desk staff, mid-50s, kept peppermints in her drawer and always called him Hun. "Hey, you okay?" Eddie glanced at the screen, then closed the laptop. "Yeah, just learning." She hesitated. Learning what? He looked at her, tired, but honest. That people smile different when you're not holding a mop. She gave a sad nod and closed the door behind her. Later that day, he overheard a board member near the elevators, whispering with someone in a blazer far shinier than theirs. One good deed doesn't mean you can run a business. Eddie didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked. Not because they were wrong, but because part of him wondered, what if they were right? The rooftop was the only place left where no one followed him. No hallway glances, no policy meetings, no echoing footsteps behind him asking questions he didn't know how to answer. Just wind, concrete, and the wide, empty sky above. He leaned against the ledge, paper cup of coffee in hand, lukewarm and too sweet. He looked out over the city, rows of windows and blinking towers. Somewhere out there, people had titles, answers, and polished shoes that never touched a mop bucket. He took a deep breath and let it out slow. "I didn't ask for any of this," he muttered. The wind didn't care. "I just wanted to matter to someone. Thought maybe if I did the job right long enough, someone would remember my name." He sipped the coffee, grimaced. "I'm not Leo. I don't know how to run meetings. I don't even know how to run a coffee maker half the time. My hands know brooms, not balance sheets." He looked at them, scarred, stained, still calloused. But he saw something. Or maybe he just didn't want the building to die alone. A pigeon fluttered down and landed beside him. Eddie raised an eyebrow. "Well, hey there." The bird cocked its head. In its beak was something,
a small metal button, old, brass. It dropped it at his feet and flew off. Eddie knelt slowly, picked it up. It was a uniform button, etched faintly, L. Whitmore, Director. He stared at it, then up at the sky, and for the first time in days, he smiled. The button sat in Eddie's palm as he returned to room 410. Leo's old office had become more than a room. It was a vault of memory, of missteps, regrets, and whispers only a janitor bothered to hear. He stepped inside, drawn again to the bookshelf. He ran his hand along the edge, then down the side of the desk where, days earlier, he'd found the journal. But this time, something else called to him. A loose panel beneath the center drawer, barely visible unless you knew where to feel. He pried it gently. A slim envelope rested inside, yellowed, unmarked, untouched by time except for the delicate curve of its corners. He unfolded the single page. Leo's handwriting, sharp, practiced, but looser than the journal, like it had been written quickly, from the chest. To whoever finds this, I've spent my life building structures that held others, but I never learned how to hold people. Maybe that's why the walls outlived the warmth. If you are reading this, it means you stayed long enough to listen to more than silence. Take care of this place, not because it's valuable, but because ghosts still walk here. They just wear uniforms. And remember, only those who sweep the halls know which way the wind blows. Eddie folded the letter slowly, reverently. His eyes burned, but he didn't blink. Leo hadn't just left him a building. He'd left him a blueprint of grace, of guilt, of redemption, and of how to carry all three without letting them crush you. The boardroom looked the same. Long table, leather chairs, stale coffee. But something about the energy had changed. Maybe it's because Eddie had left the blazer at home. He stood at the head of the table, not behind it, in rolled-up sleeves and work boots, mop calluses still on his hands. This wasn't a meeting for executives. This was a room full of people in uniforms. Maintenance workers, security, cleaners, secretaries, the ones who knew the heartbeat of the building by its creaks, not its spreadsheets. Eddie cleared his throat. I don't have a business degree, he said plainly, but I do have ears, and I figure we start by listening. He stepped aside and pointed to a whiteboard labeled, "What would you fix if you owned this place?" Silence at first. Then a hand rose. Marisol from floor sanitation. Lockers, she said. They've been broken since 2015. Another hand. Alvin from security. Break room microwave smells like death. Laughter. Eddie smiled. All right, noted. Then a third. Quiet. Hesitant. It was Grace, a newer cleaner, barely out of her 20s. She spoke softly. I used to think people like us were supposed to stay invisible, but you make us feel seen. The room quieted. Eddie's throat caught. He nodded. I was invisible too once, until someone looked at me like I mattered. He pointed to the wall where Leo's photo now hung. Not large, not gold-framed, just present. He started it. I'm just continuing it. The boardroom, once sterile, now pulsed with laughter, stories, and ideas. And for the first time, it sounded like a heartbeat. It started with small things. Fresh paint on the break room walls. A microwave that didn't smell like burnt popcorn and sadness. The vending machines stocked with more than stale chips. Then came the birthday board, a hand-painted wooden plaque near the elevator with names updated weekly in marker ink. Then came music. Quiet jazz piped into the lobby in the evenings. Nothing loud, just enough for people to...
He stood in the lobby as a sleek black sedan pulled up. Out stepped a woman in a tailored gray suit. Heels sharp, posture sharper. Behind her, a man with square glasses, phone already to his ear, nodded without looking up. They introduced themselves briskly. Vanessa Hart, Gregory Laird, real estate partners, high level. The kind who use the phrase asset repositioning. Vanessa glanced at the memory wall as they passed. Charming, she said. Let's hope the books are as colorful as the crayons. Upstairs, Eddie walked them through the renovated break rooms. The boardroom now filled with laughter instead of ego. The maintenance logs now fully digitized by Lily's help. Gregory flipped through spreadsheets. Cleaning staff hours are up. Because no one skips corners anymore, Eddie said. They feel seen. Payroll's a touch higher, Vanessa added, raising an eyebrow. Eddie nodded. We stopped firing people for aging. She didn't smile. In the main conference room, she finally sat down, tapping a gold pen against the table. You've done a lot here. Humanized the place. Gregory leaned forward. But we need more than stories, Mr. Carter. Vanessa tilted her head. This place has heart, but does it have revenue? She said plainly. Eddie sat still. He looked at the building around him. Not glass and steel, but history, healing, memory. Then he looked them both in the eyes and said nothing. Because his answer wasn't numbers. It was in the heartbeat. The spreadsheet glared at Eddie from the laptop screen. Rows and rows of numbers that looked more like code than clarity. Expenses. Retention rates. Square footage breakdowns. Something about long-term depreciation. He rubbed his temples. Leo's watch ticked quietly on his wrist, but time didn't feel like an ally right now. The memory wall didn't prepare him for this, nor did the mop or the cake. He closed the laptop with a sigh and stood, pacing the room. Every decision he made had been from instinct, not strategy. From memory, not math. And now, someone wanted numbers. He opened his phone and scrolled through his recent calls, then stopped, pressed one name. It rang once, then, hello? Eddie said, his voice lower than usual. I need help. She was quiet for a moment. With what? With everything. The budgeting, the analysis, the profit projections. They want proof this place isn't just a nice story. He could almost hear her smile. You calling me for business help? She teased. I'm swallowing more pride than I knew I had, he said. I'll be there in 20, she said gently. We'll figure it out. 20 minutes later, she sat beside him, pen in hand, explaining net margins in terms of mop handles and hallway square footage. Eddie listened like a student, nodding slowly. You always said I taught you how to scrub baseboards, he muttered. She smiled, tapping the spreadsheet. And now you'll learn to balance them. He chuckled. Then, with more sincerity than he expected, he said, You taught me how to mop floors. Let me teach you balance sheets. And somehow, that sounded like love.
In you. For a second, Eddie didn't know what to say. Then he simply smiled and replied, I'll mop up the fine print later. The pen felt foreign in Eddie's hand. He wasn't used to writing his thoughts. He cleaned floors, not spilled feelings. But today, he sat at the kitchen table, paper before him, and began. Dear Marcus. The ink stuttered slightly as he continued. I don't know how to talk about everything. Maybe I was always better with silence, but I owe you words. He paused, looked at the photo of a younger Marcus on the fridge, missing front teeth, wild curls, standing on a park bench while Leo held him steady. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I didn't know how to be strong and broken at the same time. Your mother deserved peace. You deserved protection. I didn't know how to give both. The page rippled slightly under his palm. Every mop I pushed, every hallway I walked, I hoped somehow I was earning the right to stand before you again. His pen hovered above the final lines. I watched you clean beside me last Sunday. You didn't say a word, but I heard everything. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No uniforms, no distance, just me, your dad. He signed it, folded it, slipped it into a plain white envelope. Later that day, Marcus would find it on his doorstep, tucked into the handle of his front door, like a small offering. That night, Marcus read the letter in silence. He didn't move, didn't speak, but when he reached the end, he gently placed a hand on his chest and wiped away a single tear. The boardroom was colder than usual, not in temperature, but in tension. 12 seats filled, 12 votes pending. At the head sat Gregory, beside him, Vanessa. Across from them, Eddie, wearing no suit, no pretense, just quiet composure. On the screen behind them, projections, valuations, building profitability metrics. On the table, a motion to convert the lower floors into premium executive spaces, removing the community lounge, the public art wall, and non-essential services. Vanessa cleared her throat. It's a matter of optics, prestige. The investors want shine. Gregory shifted uncomfortably, and some believe Eddie's model, while noble, doesn't reflect scalable business growth. Eddie didn't raise his voice. He just stood and held up a small stack of papers, hand-signed letters from tenants, employees, and guests. Stories. One from a widow who found community in the building's open reading space. One from a former felon who now led after-hours classes for teens. One from Lily, a crayon drawing with the words, "Mr. Eddie makes this place kind." He laid them on the table, then looked around. I've scrubbed these floors for 12 years. I know where the leaks are, and I know where the heart is. If you want a glossy shell, vote for conversion. But if you want a building that breathes, vote for people. Silence. Then Gregory raised his hand. One by one, others followed. Unanimous. Vanessa leaned in, unreadable. The model stands. Then turned to Eddie. You've earned final say on all building floor usage. He didn't smile, just nodded once. Dignity, not pride, in his chest. Time passed, not in leaps, but in small echoes. The mop closet still stood, but now it was called Leo's Nook, a storytelling corner for staff kids who came with their parents on weekends. The vending machines now offered free snacks on Thursdays, Eddie's honor hour. The staff kitchen had a new bench handmade by Marcus, carved with the phrase, "Some foundations are built by hand, not hierarchy." But the real change, it was in the way people moved. Security guards nodded to janitors, receptionists smiled at electricians, and everyone, from the CEO to the temp intern, paused to read the brass plaque near the main entrance. This building remembers because one man made sure it could. Sometimes, Eddie would walk through quietly. No clipboard, no mop, just a coffee in hand. And every now and then, he'd stop to watch. A little girl waiting for her mom to finish a shift would press her fingers to the plaque, trace the letters. And once she looked up and saw Eddie nearby. Her eyes widened. "You're him?" Eddie smiled softly. "I'm just the guy who bought a cake." She giggled, then leaned in close to the plaque and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Eddie." He didn't reply, just nodded once, slowly, then turned to leave, the afternoon light pouring through the glass behind him. The building didn't shine because it was polished. It shone
because someone had loved it long before anyone noticed.